I haven't done a video for this channel in a while since I've been working on Bible study videos for my other channel. Right now I'm between projects, so I thought this would be a good time to catch up on updating my website and producing some new content for this channel. I have a family Bible that's been in my dad's family since around 1879. In the Bible are illustrations that I've been in love with since I was a kid. The pages of the Bible are so old that anytime I touch them or move them, pieces of it fall off. I mean, they're literally crumbling and falling apart. So I thought this would be a good time to start preserving those images by scanning them, and then I can use those to update my website. On the illustration page on my website, I've had a section for vintage maps that's been there for quite a while, but the only thing that's been there are some placeholder images. Now that I have the time to work on it, I can start removing the maps from the Bible and scanning them. The first map I decided to work with was one of the tribes of Israel that were divided during the time of Joshua. The map itself was pretty stained in places. There were some brown spots, tears on the edges, and there were some pieces where the paper had actually chipped and fallen off. As I scanned the image, I used the controls in the scanning software to brighten the image up and clean it up as much as possible. Once I had that master map to work from, I then moved over to Photoshop to create the working source. I opened the map in Photoshop, and the first thing that I did was to duplicate the layer so that if I messed up, I could delete it and just make another duplicate. The maps that I'm scanning are oversized pages, so when I lay them on the scanner and shut the lid, they have a tendency to turn just a little bit. I was able to open the crop tool and use that to straighten the image and to crop it down just slightly. Once I had the image straightened and cropped, I then exported that to a PNG file. By doing that as I move along, I'm not adding layer after layer, which to me is a little bit on the confusing side. So I just go ahead at each stage and export to a PNG file, and that's going to be the beginning point for the next stage of creating the map. I opened that PNG file next in Photoshop, and that scan had been adjusted slightly on the scanner, but inside Photoshop, I'm now able to make some additional corrections. I was able to correct the saturation level, the hue slightly, and I was also able to adjust the brightness and contrast. At this stage, I noticed that there were still a lot of the brown spots and things that were showing through. I really didn't want those in the final image. It seemed to me that a black and white copy would be a good idea for a background, and then I could overlay that with an actual color section of the tribes themselves. So at this point, I adjusted the image to where I wanted it. I was able to adjust it, and then I was able to export a good black and white copy that would serve as a background. Next, I needed to cut out the tribes from the map. My knowledge and experience with the selection tools in Photoshop aren't really that good. I did try the direct selection tool and the object selection tool and a few others, but I didn't get very far with that. So finally, I decided to just use the eraser tool to remove the color areas around the tribes and get in as close as I could, and then later I could go back and refine the borders. As with any map or landmass, the borders around the tribes are pretty complicated in some areas, so I had to be careful when erasing around them. I was able to zoom in or zoom out as needed, and I could adjust the size of the eraser so that I could move around the contours of the coastline and the other borders. Once I had the borders cleaned up, I added another layer and then moved that below the map. I put a black rectangle on that to make anything above it very visible. After I've erased around the borders, there's always a little bit of color that's left right up near the edge. So by keeping a black rectangle underneath and zooming way in, I can remove those additional pixels, and that cleans it up. Once I had the borders cleaned up, I turned off the rectangle and then exported that to a PNG file, and that's going to become the source for the final composite. I opened the black and white version of the map I'd made previously, then I added another layer, and that's where the color map of the tribes is going to sit. On the new layer, I brought in the color map of the tribes and tried to size that as closely as possible. The resolution on the black and white map is hard to see, so on another monitor, I had the original map open so that I could actually use that as a reference to tell where the borders were and where things should line up. After placing the color map on top of the black and white background, it was difficult to resize it. Whenever I clicked on the drag handles at either the corners or the sides and tried to pull it, it would move the map instead of resizing it. I finally figured out that those controls are under the Transform section. I'm not really familiar with those or not really skilled with them yet, so I'm going to have to practice on those. So it was trial and error for a while, but I was able to bring in the map, size it initially, place it, and had it where I needed it. Once I had the tribes placed on the black and white background, I was able to export that to a PNG file. The next step will be to create a thumbnail for my website, resize the image so it's downloadable, and then add the entry to the web page. I'll be doing that next.